80. The Venetian Carnival. Scene Argyle Rooms. Hymen ushers the Lady Astrea. The jest took hold of Latona the cold, Ceres the brown, with bright Cytherea, Thetis the wanton, Bellona the bold, shame-faced Aurora with witty Pandora, and Maia with Flora did company bear. And many 'tis stated went there to be mated, who all their lives have been hunting the fair. Blackmantle, Transit, Eglantine, and cronies visit to the Venetian Carnival exhibits their char actors, drawn from the life general trinket. The MC cronies singadar anecdote of the great Earl of Chesterfield, and origin of the debauchettes the omissions in the Wilson memoirs supplied biographical reminiscences of the amiable Mrs. Debauchette Harriet and liar sisters Amy Mary Fanny, Julia Sophia Charlotte and Louis Epaphians, and their paramours peers and plebeians the Bang Bantam London, led a Spanish nunsparrow hawk golden pippin white crow brazen Bellona Edgware Diana. Water lily white doe comic muse queen of the Danceisettes Vestina, the Titan the red rose moss rose and cabbage, rose the doldrum stars of Erin Wren of Paradise Queen, of the Amazons old Pomona Venus mendicant Venus Colipiga goddess, of the golden locks mocking birdnet Perdita Napoleon Venus red swan black, swan blue-eyed Lunatartar Sultana, the bit of Rubrompton Ceres, Celestina Conway Lucy Bertram Water Wagtail Tops, and bottoms the pretenders the old story lady of the Priory Little White Morose Queen. Of Trump's Giovanni the Siren, with illeal names, unexed original portraits and anecdotes of the Dukes of M and D, Marquises II and Roman II, Earls W, F and C, Lords P, A, M and N, L'Honorables B, C, L, S, and FS General Trinket Colonel Caxon Messrs. IIBH, R, D and B, and other innumerables. It was during the fashionable season of the year 1818, when Augusta Corey, ci devant Lady Hawke, 1, shone forth under her newly acquired title a planet of the first order, that a few amorous noblemen and wealthy dissolutes, ever on the qui vive for novelty, projected and sanctioned the celebrated Venetian Carnival given at the Argyle Rooms under the patronage of her ladyship and 4 other equally celebrated courtesans. Of course, the female invitations were confined exclusively to the sisterhood, but restricted to the planets and stars of Cytherea, the carriage curiosities, and fair impures of the most dashing order and notoriety. And never were the revels of terpsichore kept up with more spirit, or graced with a more choice collection of beautiful, ripe, and wanton fair ones. In page 315 of our first volume, we have given a brief biographical sketch of her ladyship and her amours. 36 nor was there any lack of distinguished personages of the other sex. Almost all the leading roués of the day being present, from Lord P. Tom B**, including many of the highest note in the peerage, court calendar, and army list. The elegance and superior arrangement of this Cytherean fête was in the most exquisite taste, and such was the number of applications for admissions, and the reported splendor of the preparations, that great influence in a certain court was necessary to ensure a safe passport into the territories of the Paphian goddess. The enormous expense of this act of folly has been estimated at upwards of £2,000, and many are the dupes who have been named as bearing proportions of the same, from a royal duke to a Hebrew star of some magnitude in the city. But truth will out, and the ingenuity of her ladyship in raising the wind has never been disputed, if it has ever been equaled, by any of her fair associates. The honor of the arrangement and a good portion of the expense were, undoubtedly, borne by a broad-shouldered Milesian commissary general, who has since figured among the ton under the quaint cognomen of General Trinket, from his penchant for filling his pockets with a variety of cheap baubles, for the purpose of making presents to his numerous Dulcineas, a trifling extravagance, which joined to his attachment to rouge et noir has since consigned him to durance vile. The general is, however, certainly a fellow of some address, and, as a master of the ceremonies, deserves due credit for the superior genius he on that occasion displayed. During dinner, Crony had been telling us a curious anecdote of the great Earl of Chesterfield and Miss Debauchette, the grandmother of the celebrated courtesans, Harriet Wilson and sisters. At one of the places of public entertainment at The Hague, a very beautiful girl of the name of Debauchette, who 37 acted as limonadière, had attracted the notice of a party of English noblemen, who were all equally anxious to obtain so fair a prize. Entreaties, promises of large settlements, and every species of lure that the intriguers could invent had been attempted and played off without the slightest success. The fair limonadier was proof against all their arts. In this state of affairs arrived the then elegant and accomplished Earl of Chesterfield, certainly one of the most attractive and finished men of his time, but, without doubt, equally dissipated and notorious for the number of his amours. Whenever a charming girl in the humbler walks of life becomes the star of noble attraction and the reigning toast among the roués of the day, her destruction may be considered almost inevitable. The amorous beaux naturally inflame the ardor of each other's desires by their admiration of the general object of excitement, until the honor of possessing such a treasure becomes a matter of heroism, a prize for which the young and gay will perform the most unaccountable prodigies, and, like the chivalrous knights of old, sacrifice health, fortune, and eventually life, to bear away in triumph the fair conqueror of hearts. Such was the situation of Miss Debauchette, when the Earl of Chesterfield, whose passions had been unusually inflamed by the current reports of the lady's beauty, found himself upon inspection that her attractions were irresistible, but that it would require no unusual skill to break down and conquer the prudence and good sense with which superior education had guarded the mind of the fair limonadier. To a man of gallantry, obstacles of the most imposing import are mere chimeras, and readily fall before the ardor of his impetuosity. "Faint heart never won fair lady" is an ancient but trite proverb that always encourages the devotee. The Earl had made a large bet that he would carry off the lady. In 38 England, among the retiring and the most modest of creation's lovely daughters, his success in intrigues had become proverbial. Yet, for a long time, was he completely foiled by the fair Debauchette. No specious pretenses, nor the flattering attentions of the most polished man in Europe, could induce the lady to depart from the paths of prudence and of virtue. Every artifice to lure her into the snare of the seducer had been tried and found ineffectual, and his lordship was about to retire discomfited and disgraced from the scene of his amorous follies, with a loss of some thousands, the result of his rashness and impetuosity, when an artifice suggested itself to the fertile brain of his foreign valet, who was an experienced tactician in the wars of Venus. This was to ascertain, if possible, in what part of the mansion the lady slept, to be provided with a carriage and 4 horses, and in the dead of the night, with the assistance of 2 ruffians, to raise a large sheet before her window dipped in spirits, which being lighted would burn furiously, and then raising the cry of fire, the fair occupant would, of course, endeavor to escape. When the lover would have nothing more to do than watch his opportunity, seize her person, and conveying it to the carriage in waiting, drive off secure in his victory. The scheme was put in practice, and succeeded to the full extent of the projector's wishes. But the affair, which made considerable noise at the time, and was the subject of some official remonstrances, had nearly ended in a more serious manner. The brother of the lady was an officer in the army, and both the descendants of a poor but ancient family. The indignity offered to his name, and the seduction of his sister, called forth the retributive feelings of a just revenge. He sought out the offender, challenged him, but gave him the option of redeeming his sister's honor and his own by marriage. Alas! That was impossible. The Earl was already engaged. A meeting took place, 39 when, reflection and good sense having recovered their influence over the mind of the dissipated lover, he offered every atonement in his power, professed a most unlimited regard for the lady, suggested that his destruction would leave her, in her then peculiar state, exposed to indigence, proposed to protect her, and settle an annuity of £200 per annum upon her for her life. And thus circumstanced the brother acceded, and the affair was, by this interposition of the seconds, amicably arranged. There are those yet living who remember the fair limonadier first coming to this country, and they bear testimony to her superior attractions. The lady lived for some years in a state of close retirement, under the protection of the noble Earl in the neighborhood of Chelsea, and the issue of that connection was a natural son, Mr. Debauchette, whom report states to be the father of Harriet Wilson and her sisters. Ere man's corruptions made him wretched, he was born most noble who was born most free. Otway. So thought young Debauchet, for a more wild and giddy fellow in early life has seldom figured among the medium order of society. Whether the mother of the Cyprians was really honored with the ceremony of the ritual, I have no means of knowing, said Crony. But I well remember the lady. Before these, her beauteous daughters had trodden the slippery paths of pleasure. There was a something about her that is undefinable in language, but conveys to the mind impressions of no very pure principles of morality. A roving eye, salacious person, and swaggering carriage, with a most inviting condescension, always particularized the elder silk-stocking grafter of Chelsea, while yet the fair offspring of her house were lisping infants, innocent and beautiful as playful lambs. Debauchet himself was a right jolly fellow, careless of domestic happiness, and very fond of his bottle. And indeed that was excusable, as during a long period of his life he was concerned in the wine trade. To the conduct and instructions of the mother, the daughters are indebted for their present share of notoriety, with all the attendant infamy that attaches itself to Harriet and her sisters. And this perhaps is the reason why Mrs. Rochford, alias Harriet Wilson, so liberally eulogizes, in her memoirs, a parent whose purity of principle is so much in accordance with the exquisite delicacy of her accomplished daughter. As the girls grew up, they were employed, Amy and Harriet, at their mother's occupation, the grafting of silk stockings, while the junior branches of the family were operative clear starchers, as the old board over the parlor window used to signify, which Brummel would facetiously translate into getters up of fine linen, when Petersham did him the honor of driving him past the door, that he might give his opinion upon the rising merits of the family, who, like fragrant exotics, were always placed at the window by their judicious parent to excite the attention of the curious. But Allens, said Crony, we shall be late at the carnival, and I would not miss the treat of such an assemblage for the honor of knighthood. A very few minutes brought Transit, Eglantine, Crony, and myself within the vortex of this most seductive scene. Waltzing was the order of the night. Endearing waltz. To thy more melting tune bow Irish jig and ancient rigadoon, Scotch reels avant. And country dance, forego your future claims, to each fantastic toe. Waltz alone both legs and arms demands, liberal of feet and lavish of her hands. Hands which may freely range in public sight, where ne'er before but pray, put out the light. A coruscation of bright eyes and beauteous forms shed a halo of delight around. That must have warmed the Cyprian's ball ~41 the heart, and animated the pulse of the coldest stoic in Christendom. The specious M. C. General OM **A introduced us in his best style, quickly bowing each of us into the graces of some fascinating fair, than whom, not Cleopatra on her galley's deck, displayed so much of leg or more of neck. For myself, I had the special honor of being engaged to the Honorable Mrs. J.C. **Y, otherwise Paddon, who, whatever may have been her origin too, has certainly acquired the ease and elegance of. To Mrs. Paddon is said to have been originally a servant maid at Plymouth, and the victim of early seduction. When very young, coming to London with her infant in search of a Captain D in the D.E. militia, her first but inconstant swain, chance threw her in her abandoned condition into the way of Colonel C., who was much interested by her tale of sorrow, and more perhaps by her then lovely person, to obtain possession of which, he took a house for her, furnished it, and, as the phrase is, set her up. How long the Duke's aide-de-camp continued the favorite lover is not of any consequence, but both parties are known to have been capricious in affairs de coeur. Her next acknowledged protector was the light-hearted George D.D., then a great gun in the fashionable world. To him succeeded an amorous thane, the Irish Earl of Effie, and when his lordship, satiated by possession, withdrew his eccentric countenance, Lord Mo F.D. succeeded to the vacant couch. The Venetian masquerade is said to have produced a long carnival to this belle brunette, who seldom kept Lent, and who hero met, for the first time, a now noble Marquis, then Lord Y., to whose liberality she was for some time indebted for a very splendid establishment. But the precarious existence of such connections is proverbial, and Mrs. Paddon has certainly had her share of fatal experience. Her next paramour was a diamond of the first water, but no star, a certain dashing jeweler, Mr. C, whose charmer she continued only until kind fortune threw in her way her present constant Jack. With the hoyday of the blood, the fickleness of the heart ceases, and Mrs. Paddon is now in the sere o' the leaf, and somewhat passé with the town. It does therefore display good judgment in the lady to endeavor, by every attention and correct conduct, to preserve an attachment that has now existed for some considerable time. Indeed, it is hardly possible to find a more conversational or attractive woman, or one less free from the vulgarity which usually accompanies ladies of her caste. With this fair I danced a waltz, and then danced off to my friend Crony, who had been excused a display of agility on the score of age, and from whom I anticipated some interesting anecdotes of the surrounding stars. See plate. The Montagues, 5 sisters, all fine women, and celebrated as the stars of Erin, shone forth on this occasion with no diminished ray of their accustomed brilliancy. Mrs. Drummond, otherwise H.N. Dr. Y. Bawai, Metio, or Bulkley, the last being the only legal cognomen of the fair, led the way, followed by Maria Cross, otherwise Ladduch, Matilda Chatterton, Isabella Cummins, and Amelia Hamilton, all ladies of high character in the court of Cytherea, whose amours, were I to attempt them, would exceed in volumes, if not in interest, the chronicles of their native isle. Among the most interesting of the fairy group was the beautiful Louisa Rowley, since married to Lord L** C** less, and that charming little rosebud, the captivating Josephine, who, although a mere child, was introduced under the special protection of the celebrated Mr. B**, who has since been completely duped by the little intrigante, as also was Hep's second lover Lord P., who succeeded in the lady's favor afterwards, but from whom she fled to Lord H**, T., since whose death, an event which occurred in Paris, I hear she has reformed, and is now following the example of an elder sister, by preparing herself for the stage. Who is that dashing-looking brunette in the turban that is just entering the room? Inquired Transit, who appeared to be mightily taken with the fair incognita. That lady, with the mahogany skin and piquant appearance, is the favorite mistress of the poor Duke of Ma** B** H, responded Crony, and is no other than tilde 43 tilde tilde, the celebrated Pole Pishaw. Everybody has heard of the Queen of the Amazons, a title given to the lady in honor, as I suppose, of his Grace's fighting ancestor. Pole is said to be a great voluptuary, but at any rate she cannot be very extravagant, that is, if she draws all her resources from her protector's present purse. Do you observe that jolly dame yonder sitting under the orchestra? That is the well-known Nellie Mansell, of Crawford Street, called the Old Pomona, from the richness of her first fruits. Nellie has managed her affairs with no trifling share of prudence, and although in the decline of life, she is by no means in declining circumstances. H** Re the banker married her niece, and the aunt's cash account is said to be of very comfortable expectancy. The elegante waltzing so luxuriantly with HBH is the lovely Emma Richardson, sometime since called Standish or Davison, a Cytherean of the very first order, and the sister planet to the equally charming Ellen Hanbury, otherwise BLGV, constellations of the utmost brilliancy, very uncertain in their appearance, and equally so, if report speaks truth, in their attachment to either Jupiter, Mars, Vulcan, or Apollo. The first is denominated Venus Mendicant, from her always pleading poverty to her suitors, and thus artfully increasing their generosity towards her. Sister Ellen has obtained the appellation of Venus Callipyga, from her elegant form and generally half-draped appearance in public. Do you perceive the swarthy Amazon waddling along yonder, whom the old Earl of W.D. appears to be eyeing with no little anticipation of delight? That is a lady with a very ancient and most fish-like flavor, odoriferous in person as the oily female Esquimaux, or the more fragrant feminine inhabitants of Russian Tartary and the Crimea. She has with some of her admirers obtained the name of Dolly Drinkwater, from her known dislike to any tilde 44 tilde tilde thing stronger than pure French brandy. Her present traveling cognomen is Mrs. SB asterisk asterisk C asterisk R, otherwise Black Mall. And a wag of the day, who is rather notorious for the variety of his taste, has recently insisted upon rechristening her by the attractive nom de guerre of Nux Vomica. The little goddess of the golden locks, dancing with a well-known roué, is Fanny my asterisk RS, a very efficient partner in the dance, and if report be true, not less engaging in the sacred mysteries of Cytherea. It would fill the ample page to relate the varied anecdote with which Crony illustrated, as he proceeded to describe the silo and charybds of the unwary and the gay, who in their voyage through life are lured by the sirens of sweet voice, and the Pyrrhas of sweet lip, the Cleopatras of modern times, the conquerors of hearts, and the voluptuous rioters in pleasurable excesses, of those of whom Byron has sung. Round all the confines of the yielding waste, the strangest hand may wander undisplaced, till some might marvel with the modest Turk, if nothing follows all this palming work. To draw all the portraits who figured in the fascinating scene of gay delight would be a task of almost equal magnitude with the Herculean labors, and one which in attempting, I fear some of my readers may censure me for already dwelling too long upon. But let them remember, I am a professed painter of real life, not the inventor or promoter of these delectable knocked Attici and depraved orgies. That in faithfully narrating scenes and describing character, the object of the author and artist is to show up vice in all its native deformity. That being known, it may be avoided, and being exposed, despised. But I must crave permission to extend my notice of the Cythereans to a few more characters, ere yet the mirth-inspiring notes of the band have ceased to vibrate, or the graceful tilde 45 tilde tilde fair ones to trip it lightly on fantastic toe. This done, I shall perhaps take a peep into the supper-room, drink champagne, and pick the wing of a chicken while I whisper a few soft syllables into the ear of the nearest elegante. And then, gentle reader, start not then. The breast thus publicly resigned to man in private may resist him if it can. But here the curtain shall drop upon all the fairy sirens who lead the young heart captive in their silken chains. And the daughters of pleasure and the sons of profligacy may practice the mysteries of Cytherea in private, undisturbed by the pen of the satirist or the pencil of the humorist. The scandalizing group in close conference in the left-hand corner, behind Lord William Lennox and another dashing ensign in the Guards, is composed, said Crony, of Mrs. Nixon, the seat of Aunt Mrs. Baring Nugent's old flame, Mrs. Christopher Harrison, the two sisters, Mesdames Gardner and Peters, and the well-known Kitty Stock, all minor constellations, mostly on the decline, and hence full of envious jealousy at the attention paid by the beau to the more attractive charms of the newly discovered planets, the younger sisterhood of the convent. If we could but get near enough to overhear their conversation, said Transit, we should no doubt obtain possession of a few rich anecdotes of the Paphians and their paramours. I have already enough of the latter, said I, to fill a dozen albums without descending to the meanness of becoming a listener. Amorous follies are the least censurable of the sins of men when they are confined to professed courtesans. The heartless conduct of the systematic seducer demands indignation, but the trifling peccadilloes of the sons of fortune and the stars of fashion may be passed by, without any serious personal exposure, since time, tilde 46 tilde tilde cash, and constitution are the three practicing physicians who generally effect a radical cure without the aid of the satirist. But come, Crony, you must give us the nom de guerre of the last-mentioned belles. You have hitherto distinguished all the Cythereans by some eccentric appellation. Let us therefore have the list complete. By all means, gentlemen, replied the old beau. If I must stand godfather to the whole fraternity of Cyprians, I think I ought, at least, to have free access to every convent in Christendom. But I must refer to my tablets, for I keep a regular entry of all the new appearances, or I should never remember half their designations. Mrs. N has the harmonious appellation of the mockingbird, from her silly habit of repeating every word you address to her. Mrs. B is called the new Perdita, from a royal conquest she once made, but which we have only her own authority for believing. At any rate, she is known to be fond of a new gent, and the title may on that account be fairly her own. Mrs. CH has the honor of being distinguished by the appropriate name of the Napoleon Venus, from the similarity of her contour with the countenance of that great man. The two sisters, Mesdames G and P, are well known by the flattering distinctions of the red and the black swan, from the color of their hair and the stateliness of their carriage. And Kitty Stock has the poetical cognomen of Blue-Eyed Lima. "Now you have nearly the whole vocabulary of love's votaries," said old crony. "And be sure, young gentlemen, you profit by the precepts of experience. For not one of these frail fair ones, but in her time, has made as many conquests as Wellington, and caused perhaps as much devastation among the sons of men as any hero in the world." "But a new light breaks in upon us," said Crony, "in the person of Mrs. Simmons, the Tartar Sultana, whom you may observe conversing with Lords H.D. and P.M. in the center of the room. Poor NGNT, the Cyprian's ball 47 will long remember her prowess in battle, when the strength of her passion had nearly brought matters to a point, and that not a very tender one. But the swain cut the affair in good time, or might have been cruelly cut himself." Messrs. H.H. and R.S.W. could also give some affecting descriptions of the Tartar Sultana's rage when armed with jealousy or resentment. Her residence No. 30 BKR Street has long been celebrated as the 3XXX, a name probably given to it by some spark who found the Sultana 3 times more cross than even common report had stated her to be. The night was now fast wearing away, when Crony again directed our attention to the right-hand corner of the room, where, just under the orchestra, appeared the elder sister of the notorious Harriet Wilson seated, and in close conversation with the Milesian M.C.O.M.A., who, according to his usual custom, was dispensing his entertaining anecdotes of all his acquaintance who graced the present scene. That is Amy Campbell, otherwise Sydenham, and E. and C., but now legally Botcha, of whom Harriet has since told so many agreeable stories relative to the black puddings and Argyle. However, considerable suspicion attaches itself to Harriet's anecdotes of her elder sister, particularly as she herself admits they were not very good friends, and Harriet never would forgive Amy for seducing the Duke of Argyle from his allegiance to her. Mrs. Campbell was for some years the favorite sultana of his grace, and has a son by him, a fine boy, now about 12 years of age, who goes by the family name, and for whose support the kind-hearted Duke allows the mother a very handsome annuity. Amy is certainly a woman of considerable talent, a good musician, as might have been expected from her attachment to the harpist, and an excellent linguist, speaking the French, Spanish, and Italian languages with the greatest fluency. In her person she begins to exhibit the ravages of time, is somewhat embonpoint, with 48 dark hair and fine eyes, but rather of the keen order of countenance than the agreeable. And report says that the Signier composer, amid his plurality of wives, never found a more difficult task to preserve the equilibrium of domestic harmony. By the side of this fair one, arm in arm with a well-known bookseller, you may perceive Harriet Catchforte, alias Wilson, who, according to her own account, has had as many amours as the Grand Seignior can boast wives, and with just as little of affection in the affairs de coeur as his Sublime Highness, only with something more of publicity. Harriet gives the honor of her introduction into the mysteries of Cytherea to the Earl of Craven. But it is well known that a certain dashing solicitor's clerk then living in the neighborhood of Chelsea, and near her amiable mamma's residence, first engrossed her attention, and by whom she exhibited increasing symptoms of affection, which being properly engrafted on the person of the fair Stockinger, in due time required a release from a practitioner of another profession. An innocent affair that now lies buried deep in an odd corner at the old churchyard at Chelsea, without a monumental stone or epitaph to point out the early virtues of the fair Cytherean. To this limb of the law succeeded the Honourable B1YCN, who was then too volatile and capricious to pay his devotions at any particular shrine for more than a week together. It was this cold neglect of the Honourable's that has, perhaps, secured him from mention in her memoirs, since Harriet never speaks of her beau without giving the reader to suppose they were desperately in love with herself. Then there was more of the dignified in an affair with an earl, and Madame Harriet has a great notion of preserving her consequence, although, it must be confessed, she has latterly shown the most perfect indifference to the preservation of character. The Cyprian's ball 49 circumstance, which first gave Miss Wilson her great notoriety, was the affair with the young Marquis of Worcester, then just come out, and a willing captive to her artful wiles. So successfully did she inveigle her noble swain, and so completely environ his heart, that in the fullness of his boyish adoration of the fair Cyprian, he executed in her favor a certain promise in writing, not a promise to pay. For that might have been of no consequence, nor a promise of settlement, nor a promise to protect, nothing so unsettled, nothing less did the fair intrigante obtain than a full, clear, and definite promise of marriage, with a sufficient penalty thereunto attached to make the matter alarming and complete, with every appearance on his part to ratify the contract. In this state of things, information reached his grace of BFT of his noble heir's intention, who, not much relishing the intended honor, or perhaps doubting the permanency of his son's passion, for to question the purity of the lady was impossible, entered into a negotiation with Harriet, by which, on condition of her resigning the promise and pledging herself never to see the Marquis more on familiar terms, this disinterested woman was to receive £800 per annum. So anxious was his grace to prevent a mésalliance in his family. But alas for Harriet! Jealousy for once got the better of her love of gain. Her pride was wounded to see a sister flirting with her affianced lord, and in a moment of irritation, she in a most unequivocal manner publicly asserted her right to his person. The gallant yielded, the bond was null and void, the promise burnt, his grace relieved from the payment of £800 per annum, and his son the Marquis, profiting by past experience, not so green as to renew the former obligation. My intention is not to pirate the lady's memoirs, and so rob her of the fair gain of her professional 50 experience, said Crony, when I mentioned these circumstances to him afterwards. I only mean to supply certain trifling omissions in the biography of Harriet and her family, which the fair narrator has very modestly suppressed. It is but a few months since, that passing accidentally into Warwick Court, Holborn, to call upon an old friend, a Navy lieutenant on half-pay, I thought I recognized the well-known superlative wig of the dandy Richfort, thrust longitudinally forward from beneath the sash of a two-pair-of-stairs window. Can it be possible? Thought I, and then again I asked myself, why not? For the last time I saw him he was rusticating in Surrey, beating the balls about in Banco Regis, from which black place he did not escape without a little whitewashing. However, he's a full colonel of some unknown corps of South American independence for all that, and was once in his life, although for a very short time, a full cornet in Lincoln Stanhope's regiment, the 17th Dragoons, I think it was, and has never clipped his mustachios since, one would imagine, by their length and ferocious appearance. To be brief, I had scarcely placed my glass into the orifice before my imperfect vision, when Harriet appeared at the adjoining window, and instantly recognizing an old acquaintance, invited me upstairs. "Times are a little changed," said she, "Mr. Crony, since last we met." "True, madam," I responded, and then to cheer the bell a little I added, "but not persons, I perceive, for you are looking as young and as attractive as ever." The compliment did not seem to please the colonel in the wig, who turned round, looked frowningly, and then twirled the dexter side of his lip wing into a perfect circle. It is not possible that this thing can affect jealousy of such a woman as Harriet, thought I, so proceeded with our conversation. And he shortly resumed his polite amusement of spitting upon the children who were 51 playing marbles beneath his window. "I am really married to that monster yonder," said she in an undertone. "How do you like my choice?" "I am not old enough in the gentleman's acquaintance to hazard an opinion on his merits," quoth I, "but you are a woman of experience, Belle Harriet, and should be a good judge of male bipeds, although it cannot say much in favor of your military taste." "And you was always a quiz, Crony," retorted Belle Harriet. "Remember my sister Mary, who is now Mrs. Botchsa 3, how you used to annoy her about her gaudy style of dressing, when we used to foot it at Chelsea. But I 3 there were in all 8 sisters of the Debauchettes, and 3 brothers, but only one of the latter is living. Of the girls, Amy is now Mrs. Botchsa, Mary married to a nephew of Sir Richard Bow HS, a great Irish contractor. Harriet, actually married to Cornet Richforte. Fanny expired in the holy keeping of the present Marquis of H. Sophia has been raised to the peerage, by the style and title of Lady BK, and by her subsequent conduct well deserves her elevation. Julia, an affectionate girl, clung to the House of Coventry through poor Tom's days of adversity, and died early, leaving some unprotected orphans. Charlotte and Louisa, younger sisters, the first now about 18 and very beautiful, although a little lame, have been educated and brought up by their elder sister, the Baroness, and are by her intended for the church vestals for Hymen's altar. At any rate, I hope they will escape the sacrifices of Cytherea. Harriet is now about 40 years of age. She was, when at her zenith, always celebrated rather for her tact in love affairs, and her talent at invention, than the soft, engaging qualifications of the frail fair, which fascinate the eye and lead the heart captive with delight. Her conversational powers were admirable. But her temper was outrageous. With a natural inclination to the satirical to sum up her merits at once, she was what a connoisseur would have called a bold, fine woman, rather than an engaging, handsome one more of the English Bellona than the Venus de Medici. Crony's account of the Round Room and Belle Harriet's first views of publishing are, I have since learned, strictly correct. There is not a person mentioned in her memoirs, or scarcely one of any note in the court guide, of whom she has at any time had the slightest knowledge, that have not been applied to repeatedly within the last 3 years, and received threats of exposure to compel them to submit to extortion. Tilde 52 tilde want your assistance. Egad, I dare say, I looked rather comical at this moment, for in truth I was somewhat alarmed at the last phrase. Harriet burst into a loud fit of laughter. The colonel drew in his elegant wig, and deigned a smile. While I, involuntarily forcing my hand into the pocket of my inexpressibles, carefully drove the few sovereigns I had up into one corner, fearing the Belle Harriet had a mighty notion of laying strong siege to them. In this, however, I was agreeably disappointed. For recovering herself, she acknowledged she had perceived my embarrassment, but assured me I need be under no alarm on this occasion, as, at present, she only wanted to borrow a few ideas. What a relief the last short word afforded. I have been writing some sketches of my life, said she, and am going to publish. Give me your opinion, crony, upon its merits. And without more ceremony, she thrust a little packet of papers into my hand, headed Sketches in the Round Room at the Opera House, in which all the characters of the opera frequenters were tolerably well drawn, nor was the dialogue deficient in spirit. But the titles were all fictitious, such as my Lord Redhead, for the Marquess of H.D., Lord Pensiveham, for P.M., and so on to the end of the chapter. Having glanced through the contents, I recommended her to Colburn as the universal speculator in paper and print. But His Highness is playing Magnifico, à la Murray, in his new mansion, it would seem. For he, as I have since learned, refused to publish. At length, after trying all man and others, Belle Harriet hit upon Stockdale, who, having made some bad hits in his time, thought a little courtesanish scandal could not make bad worse. Under his superintendence, real names were substituted for the fictitious, and it is said that the choice notes of the lady are interwoven and extended, connected and illustrated, by the same elegant Apollo who used to write love letters for Mary Ann, and tilde 58 tilde love epistles to 50,000, including Bang and the Bantam, in the dark refectory of the celebrated Mother Wood, the Lady of the Priory, or Lisle Street Convent. If such is the case, how are the mighty fallen? Said I, but let us return to the ballroom. As the night advanced, a few more stars made their appearance in the firmament of beauty. Among these, Crony pointed out some of the demure spectacles, attracted thither either by curiosity or the force of old habit. Among these was Charles Yhm's bit of rue, that herb of grace, the once beautiful Mrs. Ho G.S., since closely connected with the whiskered Lord P., to whose brother, the Honorable F.G., her daughter, the elegant Miss W.N., had the good fortune to be early married. In the same group appeared another star of no mean attraction, the Honorable Mrs. L.G., whose present husband underwent the ordeal of a crim. Con. Trial to obtain her person. Par nobile fraudum, the world may well say of the brothers, P and L.G., while F.Y., with all his eccentricities, has the credit of being a very good husband. 3 little affected mortals, the Mrs. St. T.S., Crony introduced by the name of the pretenders, from the assumed modesty and great secrecy with which they carry on their amours. Passe a pas en va bien loin, says the old French proverb, and rightly too, remarked our ancient. For if you boys had not brought me here, I should never have known the extent of my experience, or have attempted to calculate the number of my female acquaintances. In the supper room, which opened at 4 o'clock in the morning, Watt had spread forth a banquet every way worthy the occasion. A profuse display of the choicest viands of the season and delicacies of the most costly character graced the splendid board, where the rich juice of the grape and the inviting ripeness of the dessert were only equaled by the voluptuous votaries, who 54 surrounded the repast. It was now that ceremony and the cold restraint of well-regulated society were banished, by the free circulation of the glass. The eye of love shot forth the electric flash which animates the heart of young desire, lip met lip, and the soft cheek of violet beauty pressed the stubble down of manliness. Then, while the snowy orbs of nature undisguised heaved like old ocean with a circling swell, the amorous lover palmed the melting fair, and led her forth to where shame-faced Aurora, with her virgin gray, the blue-eyed herald of the golden morn, might hope in vain to draw aside the curtain and penetrate the mysteries of Cytherea. And now, gentle reader, be ye of the hardy sex, who dare the glories of the healthful chase and haunt the peopled stream of gay delightor of that lovely race, from which alone man's earthly joys arise. The soft-skinned conquerors of hearts be ye prudes or stoics, chaste as virgin gold, or cold as Alpine snow, confess that I have strictly kept my promise here, nor strayed aside in all my wanderings among the daughters of pleasure, to give pain to worthy bosoms or offend the ear of nicest modesty. Pity for the unfortunate, and respect for the feelings of the relatives of the vicious and the dissolute, has prevented the insertion of many anecdotes, with which Crony illustrated his sketches of character. Enough, it is presumed, has been done to show vice in all its native deformity, without wounding the ear by one immoral or indelicate expression. For the unhappy fair ones who form the principal portraits, it should be remembered they have been selected from those only who are notorious as belles of the first order, stars of fashion, and if not something indebted to fortune, they would have escaped enrollment here. When beauty and poverty are allied, it must too often fall a victim to the eager eye of roving lust. For, even to the titled 55 profligate, beauty, when arrayed in a simple garb of spotless chastity, seems fairer she in innocence and homespun vestments spread, than if cerulean sapphires at her ears shone pendant, or a precious diamond cross heaved gently on her panting bosom white. But let the frail remember that the allurements of wealth and the blandishments of equipage fall off with possession and satiety. To the force of novelty succeeds the baseness of desertion. For a short time, the fallen one is fed like the silkworm upon the fragrant mulberry leaf, and when she has spun her yellow web of silken attraction, sinks into decay, a common chrysalis shakes her trembling and emaciated wings in hopeless agony, and then flutters and droops, till death steps in and relieves her from an accumulation of miseries, ere yet the transient summer of youth has passed over her devoted head. Bernard Blackmantle, The Philosophy of Laughter, or Mr. Punch in all his glory.